They invited me because it looked polite. That is the truth I understood much later. At the time, I believed I was still part of their world. The world of polished tables, controlled laughter, and conversations that never slowed down long enough for honesty to breathe. I wore the dress they suggested. Neutral color. Safe. Forgettable. I told myself that was maturity. That was knowing my place. The table was long. Heavy wood. Expensive. Every seat already claimed by confidence. By voices that never hesitated. I sat where they pointed. Near the corner. Not at the head. Not near the center. Close enough to be seen, far enough to be ignored. No one asked what I thought. They spoke over me easily, like stepping around furniture that had always been there. I nodded when expected. Smiled when someone glanced in my direction. Lifted my glass when the others did, even when I hadn't heard the joke. Across the table, he spoke with the certainty I once admired. His hand rested on the back of another chair. A younger woman's chair. She laughed too loudly. He did not correct her. No one did. I noticed how the room leaned toward him when he spoke, how decisions were treated like stories already finished. I noticed how my name was never used. Only pronouns. Only pauses. Someone said, "She's fine with it." I realized then that I had become a background agreement. Something assumed. Something settled long before I was asked. I told myself not to overthink it. That was my greatest weakness. Because silence, when misunderstood, becomes permission. And permission, once given, is very hard to take back. I stayed quiet because quiet had always kept me safe. That was what I believed. Silence had been my armor for years. It helped me avoid conflict, avoid embarrassment, avoid the exhausting work of proving myself in rooms that had already decided who mattered. At that table, quiet felt familiar. They talked about investments I didn't understand anymore. Numbers moved too fast. Names of people I had never met passed around like private jokes. I listened without interrupting, afraid that one wrong question would expose how far behind I had fallen. Once, I tried to speak. I opened my mouth, just slightly, when they discussed a decision that affected me too. The words were already forming, careful and soft, but someone laughed. Another voice cut across mine effortlessly. The moment passed. No one noticed. I closed my mouth and folded my hands in my lap, as if that was what I had intended all along. Across from me, the younger woman leaned closer to him. Her hand brushed his sleeve. Casual. Possessive. She didn't look at me when she did it. She didn't need to. I wondered how long everyone else had known. Not suspected. Known. I searched their faces for discomfort, for guilt, for anything that suggested this situation was complicated. I found none. Only ease. Only routine. Someone refilled my glass without asking. Another mistake. I drank even though I didn't want to. The wine tasted expensive and distant, like everything else in the room. I felt myself shrinking, not physically, but internally, folding inward to take up less space. That was when I realized something else. They weren't trying to hurt me. Hurting me would have required effort. Attention. Intention. They simply didn't consider me relevant enough to protect. And that realization settled deeper than humiliation ever could. Because humiliation fades. Being erased does not. I left the table before dessert. No one stopped me. No one noticed. The hallway outside was quiet, lined with mirrors that reflected versions of myself I barely recognized. A woman holding a glass she no longer wanted. A woman who had learned how to disappear without moving. In the restroom, I locked myself into a stall and waited. Not because I needed to cry. I didn't. My body felt strangely calm, as if it had already accepted something my mind was still avoiding. I listened to voices pass by. Laughter. Heels clicking. Life continuing, uninterrupted. That was when the thought first appeared, not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. I understood, with unsettling precision, that nothing had happened suddenly. This was not betrayal born in a moment. It was erosion. Years of being easy. Years of agreeing too quickly. Years of trusting silence to protect me. I had trained them to ignore me. Back at the table, they were probably still talking. Still planning. Still assuming I would adapt, as I always had. They would expect me to smile tomorrow. To adjust quietly. To be reasonable. Reasonable had cost me everything. I washed my hands slowly. Studied my face. There was no dramatic change, no sudden strength. Just awareness. Awareness changes things. When I returned, dessert had arrived. Someone gestured for me to sit. I did. Same seat. Same corner. Same glass. But something had shifted. I began to listen differently. Not to follow. To collect. Names. Dates. Small contradictions. Who interrupted whom? Who deferred? Who avoided eye contact when money was mentioned? They still thought I was invisible. That was their second mistake. I did not become clever overnight. That matters. I did not suddenly understand finance or power or manipulation. What I understood was simpler, and far more dangerous. Patterns. I noticed how often my name appeared on documents I had never truly read. How often decisions were framed as favors. How frequently urgency was used to silence questions. "You trust me, right?" had been his favorite phrase. Trust, I learned, is often requested when transparency is absent. At the table, the conversation turned toward future plans. Expansions. Partnerships. Risk framed as confidence. I watched how agreement traveled around the table like a current, pulling everyone along. Including me. I nodded automatically, then stopped myself. The pause was brief. Almost invisible. But it mattered to me. I realized I had never actually disagreed in this room. Not once. Even when my stomach tightened. Even when something felt wrong. Disagreement required presence. I had been present physically. Nothing more. The supporting voice appeared then, exactly as before. The one who always meant well. The one who said things like, "It will work out," and "He wouldn't do that to you." Comfort is persuasive. Especially when you are tired. I smiled at that voice and said nothing. Inside, something hardened. Not into cruelty. Into structure. That night, when the gathering ended and goodbyes were exchanged, I left with everyone else. Calm. Polite. Unremarkable. They assumed I would forget details. They were wrong. Because forgetting is a luxury of those who feel safe. I did not feel safe anymore. I felt alert. And alertness, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. The days after the gala were quiet. Too quiet. No confrontations. No explanations. Just routine pretending nothing had shifted. He spoke to me the same way. Warm. Confident. Certain I remained exactly where he had left me. I played my role well. I answered messages promptly. I agreed when expected. I let plans move forward without resistance. Weakness, when performed consciously, becomes camouflage. At night, I reviewed everything I could remember. Not obsessively. Methodically. Conversations replayed themselves with new meaning. Small jokes that weren't jokes. Compliments that disguised control. Decisions presented as inevitabilities. The supporting voice checked in often. Don't overthink it, it said. Maybe you misunderstood. You're tired. I thanked that voice for its concern. Then I ignored it. Because fatigue doesn't erase facts. I began reading documents I had previously skimmed. Slowly. Line by line. Without assuming goodwill. I noticed clauses that favored timing over fairness. Authority over partnership. I still didn't know what I was looking for. But I knew I would recognize it when I saw it. Power leaves fingerprints, and once you learn to see them, they appear everywhere. The first clear fracture appeared on a Tuesday. An email forwarded by mistake. Nothing dramatic. No confession. Just a chain of replies that revealed how decisions were being made when I wasn't in the room. My name used as approval. My silence translated as consent. I read it 3 times. Not to feel hurt. To understand the mechanism. They spoke about me as if I were a constant, not a variable. Reliable. Predictable. Already accounted for. That realization was colder than betrayal. I closed the laptop and sat still. The supporting voice returned, almost pleading now. Everyone does this. It doesn't mean anything. You're imagining patterns. Patterns do not imagine themselves. That night, I did something small but irreversible. I stopped explaining myself. No justifications. No emotional context. No over-clarifying messages designed to keep others comfortable. The absence was subtle. But people notice when a familiar noise disappears. Questions followed. Gentle at first. Then sharper. I answered simply. Briefly. Truthfully. Not strategically yet. Instinctively. Something inside me was reorganizing. I was no longer reacting to events. I was watching them. Distance changes perspective. When I stopped filling the silence, others rushed to fill it for me. Meetings happened without my invitation. Decisions were summarized afterward. Always politely. Always late. I observed tone more than content. Who hesitated? Who rushed? Who avoided my eyes? Power dynamics announced themselves quietly. At home, I started keeping notes. Not accusations. Patterns. Dates. Language shifts. Who benefited when I stayed agreeable? Who became irritated when I didn't? The supporting voice grew restless. This isn't you. You're becoming cold. Why create tension? I didn't answer. Because tension already existed. I had simply stopped absorbing it. One evening, I realized something unsettling. I had been chosen not because I was weak, but because I was useful. That distinction mattered. Weakness invites protection. Usefulness invites exploitation. Once usefulness declines, loyalty vanishes. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would not confront. I would not warn. I would not rush. I would let my usefulness fade, while building something else in its place. Something invisible. Something patient. I began to disappear selectively. Not emotionally, strategically. I declined involvement that offered visibility without leverage. I delayed responses that assumed automatic compliance. I asked questions instead of giving answers. Nothing aggressive. Just enough friction to expose dependency. Reactions were immediate. Confusion. Irritation. Subtle pressure disguised as concern. You seem distracted. Is everything okay? We rely on you. I noted who said we, and who said I. The supporting voice softened its tone. Be careful. You might lose trust. This could backfire. Trust based on silence is not trust. It is convenience. Behind the scenes, I rebuilt skills I had neglected. Read what I once avoided. Learned systems I had been shielded from. I stopped assuming protection meant safety. Knowledge is heavier than reassurance. For the first time, I felt fear, not of loss, but of clarity. Because clarity demands action. And action reshapes identity. By the end of that week, I understood something irreversible. I could not return to who I had been. Even if I wanted to. The door hadn't closed. I had stepped through it. Change rarely announces itself with drama. It arrives as discomfort. I started noticing how often I had explained myself in the past. How many sentences began with apologies. How many decisions I softened so others would feel comfortable. That version of me had been easy to manage. This one was not. Small shifts created ripples. I no longer volunteered information. I no longer filled gaps with reassurance. Silence became a tool instead of a threat. People talk more when you don't interrupt them. And they reveal more when they believe you are still harmless. I learned who spoke to influence, who spoke to impress, who spoke out of fear. The supporting voice tried again, gentler this time. Maybe you're overthinking. Maybe it's just stress. You've always trusted them. Trust is not a memory. It is a current condition. I revisited moments I had dismissed before. Conversations that ended too quickly. Praise that arrived before effort. Promises framed as generosity. Patterns sharpen when you stop defending them. Late one night, reading through my notes, I felt something new. Not anger. Not grief. Precision. I could trace the structure now. Who stood where? Who moved when pressure appeared? Who benefited from confusion? For the first time, the situation stopped feeling personal. It became mechanical. And mechanisms can be dismantled. By minute 18, everything shifted. A sense of power settled quietly in my chest. I no longer reacted immediately. I waited. Calculated. observed. The supporting voice still commented, but I barely listened. I thought you were different. Are you sure this is wise? People will notice. Let them notice. I took small steps each day. Practice in conversation. Observation in meetings. Testing reactions. Each micro move a preparation for something larger. At home, I mapped resources I had ignored. Contacts. Opportunities. Weak points of dependency, all hidden beneath courtesy, smiles, and routine. I realized something crucial: preparation does not feel like preparation. It feels like normal life. But the moment of execution? That is everything. I also discovered patience is more powerful than anger. Anger is immediate. Patience accumulates. The supporting voice sighed once. You are not the same. And I smiled, quietly, because I finally knew, I had not changed. I had awakened. Confidence settled like a cloak. Not arrogance. Not display. Just quiet certainty. I noticed who hesitated when I spoke. Who leaned in. Who tried to fill silence with chatter. Each interaction became a puzzle, revealing tendencies, priorities, hidden agendas. The supporting voice murmured from the sidelines. Careful, don't push too hard. I smiled faintly. Pushing was no longer my tool, observation was. I created scenarios in my mind. Responses. Failures. Unexpected outcomes. Each a rehearsal. Each rehearsal a tiny victory. I realized my mistakes had value now. Each misstep, each moment of hesitation, had taught me to read people, anticipate moves, and hold power invisibly. By the 20th minute, a subtle strategy was in place. Not revenge yet. Not confrontation. Just control. And control is a powerful thing. Even my supporting ally noticed. You're different. Yes, I said softly. And patient. The gala approached, but my focus had shifted. I watched, not reacted. I listened, not interjected. The room glittered, people dazzled, but I felt no urgency to impress. Every glass raised, every whispered compliment, every glance exchanged, data. Not gossip. Not vanity. Intelligence disguised as indulgence. I noticed subtle cracks. A sigh that lingered too long. A laugh that didn't reach eyes. Someone reaching too often for affirmation. Someone hiding. Someone bold. I arranged my own presence like chess pieces. Step by step. Placement by placement. Subtle enough to be unnoticed, strategic enough to matter. My supporting ally leaned in. You're ready, aren't you? I nodded. Yes. And I know the game. Minute 18 arrived like a silent drumbeat. A subtle awareness. A spark. I noticed the imbalance. Where weakness had been exploited, opportunity now lingered. Where deception had hidden, clarity emerged. The supporting ally whispered again. Do you feel it? Yes, I replied. The moment is coming. I began to move with intention. Not hastily, not recklessly, but with precision. Each gesture measured. Each word deliberate. Even silence spoke louder than noise. I observed patterns forming. Some people trying to protect their positions. Some people assuming I was still naive. All assumptions now miscalculated. The glittering room, once a maze, became a map. Every glance, every whisper, every movement, coordinates. I mapped weaknesses, strengths, alliances, and hidden threats. Power is invisible until exercised. And I had begun to exercise it quietly. By the 19th minute, a transformation was undeniable. The woman who had whispered apologies and followed orders was gone. In her place stood someone quiet, observant, deliberate. The supporting ally noticed, too. "You're unstoppable," they said softly. "Yes," I whispered back. "Because I see everything they cannot." The gala continued around us. Music, laughter, applause, a facade. I walked through it like a shadow, unseen yet present. Each conversation a test. Each toast an opportunity. Each smile a potential exposure. I realized the power of patience. The advantage of waiting. The silent accumulation of knowledge, influence, and timing. I did not need to act immediately. The world would reveal itself to those who knew how to watch. By the 20th minute, subtle actions became visible. I approached conversations with intention. Every word measured, every pause deliberate. The room reacted, though not immediately obvious. Small ripples of influence spread quietly. The supporting ally whispered from the side. "You're changing the game." "Yes," I replied. "And no one suspects." I began to leverage secrets I had gathered. Connections. Dependencies. Misplaced trust. All waiting silently for the right moment. I observed who controlled the room, who craved attention, who feared exposure. I placed myself strategically, not in the center, but where eyes occasionally glanced. Power rarely needs to scream. It only needs to be present. Patience, observation, subtle action, these became my tools. And with these tools, the real work could begin. By the 22nd minute, the shift was undeniable. Conversations I had planned, reactions I had predicted, moments I had orchestrated, all aligned. The gala's glittering facade hid trembling uncertainties beneath. Whispers of influence began to circulate without my speaking a word. The supporting ally leaned closer. "They don't see it coming." "No," I said softly. "They think I am still the same woman." But I had evolved. Every slight, every oversight, every underestimation was now my advantage. The room, once overwhelming, was now a chessboard. Every move, every pause, every glance, calculated. Patience turned to action in imperceptible ways. The first ripple of consequence began, unnoticed by most. But I felt it in every detail. The time had come to execute the plan fully. Minute 25. I moved like a silent storm. No one noticed the small changes, the subtle shifts in attention and power. But I noticed everything. The supporting ally whispered, "It's happening." "Yes," I said, "the balance is tipping." I began to use the vulnerabilities I had catalogued. Financial oversights, emotional weaknesses, fragile alliances, all carefully tracked. One by one, they became levers of influence. I spoke softly, smiled gently, laughed at the right moments. But each gesture carried hidden weight. Every word a calculated seed planted. The gala continued unaware, glittering masks hiding true intentions. By the time the first acknowledgement of change appeared, I had already moved 2 steps ahead. Patience, observation, subtle power, it was now unstoppable. Minute 32. The gala ended. Applause faded, guests departed, and the glittering night gave way to quiet reflection. I stood in the center, calm, collected. The supporting ally nodded with admiration. "You did it," they whispered. "Yes," I said, and it was always within reach. The woman who had been naive, weak, and trusting had transformed. Not through force or anger, but through patience, observation, and calculated action. The power was hers, quietly earned, fully deserved. I looked around the room one last time. Faces filled with unknowing, some humbled, some oblivious, but I held the invisible crown. The lesson: power is silent until recognized. Strength is subtle until exercised. And a quiet mind can change everything.